Never Love a Goalie Part 1 is the 16th episode of the 5th season of Cheers. This is directed, of course, by the wonderful James Burrows, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode. I'm not going to spoil future episodes, but I will just say that if you've watched Cheers all of the way through before and you know what happens with various characters, watching this now and receiving the character of Eddie for the first time, it's a different experience to the first time that I watched this. I'll say no more than that, but if you haven't seen the future episodes, maybe come back to this episode once you have. It's a different experience. Nevertheless, it's still a good episode, and it starts off quite delightfully with Norm and Cliff in Cheers at closing time. Woody and Sam are tidying up, ready to lock up, and just as they're leaving, as Norm and Cliff are leaving, they remind them that it's daylight savings, and it's the clock going back. So they put the clock back. Hey ho, it's 1 o'clock again. The bar must still be open. And I've never thought about that. I don't know how that works if an establishment usually shuts at a certain time, but at daylight savings it goes back. Do they have to stay open an extra hour? I don't have an answer for that, but I never thought of that before. So that was kind of fascinating. We then have Frasier coming into the bar, and unfortunately a chimpanzee has passed away, who was the chimpanzee of an esteemed psychologist, somebody he admired, and he's not feeling very happy about that. Diane then comes in, and she has jury duty. And in Diane fashion, we will hear more about that in a little bit. We then have Eddie LeBec coming into the bar. He's played by Jay Thomas, and to begin with, there's a bit of mystery, as a lot of people are aware of him. Carla is immediately aware of him, and Norm seems to know who he is, and Frasier asks who is Eddie LeBec, and we find out that he's actually a hockey player. And more importantly, he's a hockey player Carla admires. And she goes up to him, and she becomes tongue-tied, and she says that she's a big fan, and he seems surprised that somebody knows who he is. I think he really likes that recognition. I think it's not something he's used to, and she starts to pour all of these facts about him to show that actually she is a genuine fan, and he ends up giving her his tickets to the game that evening. And initially, Norman and Cliff are fighting over who gets the extra ticket because there were two of them. Frasier ends up going somewhat reluctantly, but nevertheless, he decides to go along. And afterwards, immediately in the next scene, Carla comes in the next day, overjoyed at how it went. She was so happy with the game. And Frasier was apparently hauled off in a security van due to a scuffle. We do find more about that in a bit, but it seems like it wasn't a jolly experience for Frasier. We then find out that Eddie is still interested in Carla beyond giving her his tickets. He comes into the bar, things are going really well, and just every now and then, Diane will just walk past. She'll just kind of walk in front of the camera or just to the side and retort to something Carla was saying. Carla was giving off a bunch of lies about how she was never married and had no kids, and then Diane replied, "You're next in line to the throne of England," which I love. Just Diane was very random and very well delivered there. Frasier then comes in looking a little worse for wear. We have a lot of, I never realised it when watching it, but now that I'm saying it out loud, we have a lot of people coming and going in Cheers in this episode. That door opens and closes a lot, and I think that's one of the great things about Cheers. I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but the bar setting works so well because you never know who is going to walk through that door, and that's the premise of this episode, of course. I don't think anybody expected Eddie LeBec to walk through that door. I'm sure Frasier wasn't expecting to walk through the door looking quite as bedraggled as he did, and we finally get the story. And I like the fact that we had a couple of minutes to sit with this before we established what had happened. And basically, Frasier had started to enjoy himself. He wanted to watch the game. He asked somebody wearing a cowboy hat if he could take off his hat, and things escalated from there. And we then go back to Carla and Eddie, and Carla finally tells Eddie the truth, that she does have 6 children. Eddie still wants to see her. They go outside and kiss. Carla comes back in, and it's the happiest I've ever seen her. She is ecstatic. We then have the next day, and Carla comes into work at Cheers, and she says that they're just friends, but I think it's very clear that Carla is definitely very smitten Diane comes in after this. As I said, a lot of people coming and going in this episode. And she's had her first day as part of the jury. And it's quite fascinating because she is talking and talking and talking, as Diane often does, but she's saying nothing. That is kind of the point, that she's not really allowed to talk about it, so she's going to go on about the fact she can't talk about it, but I've never known somebody to talk so much and not say very much at all. Very, very impressive. And we have a bit that made me burst out loud laughing. Not necessarily because it's side-splittingly funny. It was just a beautiful, a beautiful Woody moment, and it caught me off guard. Eddie comes up to the bar and Sam tells Woody to get him a club soda with a couple of other things in it. And Woody asks Sam, how did you know that's what he wanted? And Sam replies here. It is funny, I promise. Sam replied, he ordered it yesterday. And Woody's response is, oh, well, I better hurry. I didn't expect it. I found it to be very, very funny. Sometimes Woody just comes out with the most fantastic things, and that's absolutely one of them. Sam then tells Eddie an anecdote about Coach, a little ritual that they used to have where they would rub each other. I realise out of context that might sound a bit strange, but the anecdote was very, very sweet, and it's nice. Just every now and then, Coach will be mentioned, and it's always difficult. I always get a little lump in my throat when Coach is mentioned because it always catches me off guard, but it's always really lovely to hear. I love that they still keep Coach's memory alive, still keeping us aware of Nicholas Colasanto's presence, and I think that that's a really beautiful thing. And things for Carla are pretty beautiful as well, as Eddie kisses her quite passionately, and then he needs to leave. And it's not the first time Eddie has come into the bar, ordered a drink, and left very, very quickly after it. I can't imagine how much money he wastes on drinks he doesn't drink. But he leaves, and he dropped his wallet, and Carla picks it up and throws it at him. And I think that was a clear sign of what was to come, because he misses the wallet. And obviously the implication there is that as a hockey player, he should have seen it. He should have been able to intercept it, but he didn't. And this is definitely a sign of what's to come. Immediately after that, we then have the scene with the game on the television. Everybody's watching it, or a lot of people are watching it at least, and Diane is talking to customers about the case, but also not about the case. And then Woody stands up at one point and cheers the alphabet, which is rather adorable. And then Diane's talking to some other customers about the case. And then we see things unfolding on the screen, and things don't go well for Eddie LeBec that night during the hockey game. And Carla feels terrible. And then we end. And of course we have part 2 coming up in the next episode, which I won't talk about, at least not just now. This episode is definitely very different. It's very busy. There are a lot of people coming and going. Well, actually, it's the same few people coming and going constantly, but it works really well. The pacing is great. We're just jumping from one scene to the next really quickly, and it's great to see Carla's mood increasing throughout the episode. So that makes the crash at the end all the more dramatic. And I feel like it's not a huge cliffhanger. It's not like, say, some of the cliffhangers we've had with Sam and Diane, but it definitely, I know what happens next, but it definitely provides the suspense of what will happen with Carla next. How is she going to react? Will she see Eddie LeBec again? Obviously, it's a 2-parter, so there is an assumption there, but I feel like things could go in any direction from here, but I will say no more. I will wait until we get there. Personal highlights from this episode, I think it's Woody saying, oh, well, I better hurry, because I just thought it was absolutely adorable, and Diane just talking and saying nothing, and Carla's extreme happiness. It's a really interesting episode. As I said, without going into too much detail, it is definitely a different experience watching this now after what I know about things in the future. And I'm sure you know exactly what I mean if you've seen the future episodes, but I will discuss those things in due course when we get there. And for now, I'll wrap up by saying Never Love a Goalie Part 1 is, of course, a really decent episode.